Today I'm joined by Coronation Street expert Mark Llewellin, and over the years he's run coach tours for filming locations, given talks on the street, forged close relationships with Corrie legends including Summers, Roy Barraclough and Julie Goodyear, and this week he's published his memoir with friends like these. Mark's kindly agreed to come on the podcast today to talk about his book and share some stories about his Weatherfield pals. Mark, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Delight to be with you.
It is lovely to have you here. So you've had this really long and varied career, haven't you? London Transport announcer, Oldham Coliseum director, tour guide, gardening centre manager, and you've met so many famous faces on the way, making so many friends. So why did you decide that the time was right now to write your memoir?
My nephew said to me, very soon you'll be dead.
Harsh.
Harsh, but
Certainly hope not, Mark.
I hope not, but I know what he meant. And he said, "You always tell these stories," and I tell a lot of the stories in the book have appeared in my talks, that I do, and I keep a diary, so I've written down all these tales over the years. And he said, you should do something with it. So I started to write it really just for the family, and then a friend of mine read it and said, no, it deserves to be published, really, because these stories, people will enjoy them. And certainly in the talks I give, everyone wants to know about the people you've just mentioned and a lot of the non-Corrie people that I met. So that was really why I did it.
Yeah, well, I finished reading it over the weekend, and honestly, I loved it. It's just jam-packed full of fond memories, funny anecdotes from yourself and the people you've met over the years. It's hard to know where to start with my questions, really. I've got so much to ask, but I think that one thing that's going to be on a lot of our listeners' minds is how's Julie?
Well, Julie, she's living a good life, really. She still loves leopard print. I'm pleased to say, and I see her at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, and have a few hours with her. We still enjoy what we've been doing for years now, which is have afternoon theatre house, which I call Leopard Print Boulevard, on a Sunday, and we still enjoy that. And she's quite happy. She goes out regularly. I take a chocolate cake every time I go on a Sunday, and we tuck into that. Well, actually, she doesn't let me have any, to be honest. But yeah, no, she's good. I mean, obviously, she has dementia, as everybody knows, and I talk about that in the book. But it's wrong to say, as I also point out in the book, it's wrong to say you suffer with dementia. You live with dementia. It changes what you can do and how you look at life. I think Julie's been very brave and very strong about that. Obviously, it's changed life for her husband, for Scott, but I have to say, I absolutely take my hat off to Scott. He is phenomenal. Yeah. Everybody in that position would want a Scott. He is absolutely brilliant.
Oh, well, you wrote in your book about how it was the papers releasing those pictures of her out and about last year. That made you and him put together the press release about the condition, didn't it? Are you glad that it's all out in the open now? Is she glad?
Yeah, they threatened to put the pictures out rather than they didn't actually appear.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, we'd always talked about it and we'd always kind of intended to put it out, or Scott had, and I wrote the press release. It just brought it forward a little bit. Sure. They always wanted to go public with dementia on the basis that it could help those also going through a similar thing, to think, that there was somebody like Julie who was in the same position, and it has. I mean, it brought in, I can't tell you, thousands of letters from people.
Wow. One of the things you said in the chapter is about her is how you're one of the few people who's got to really know the real Julie Goodyear. So how would you describe what the real Julie is like? And have you got any good stories about when she's been most Juliest, so to speak?
So I think most people would say, Julie and Bet, there's a crossover, and there certainly is. Yeah. But what you perhaps see also in Bet over the years, when you look back at the stuff, is Bet was strong, she was brassy, she was a little bit frightening at times. But underneath there was a very soft heart and very vulnerable person. And I think Julie is very similar in that regard. So it's been nice to kind of share some of those moments, and to talk about life and things like that without that kind of armor, I suppose. A very vulnerable Julie, which I have. She is a lovely person. I think, you know, over the years she's been a bit characterized by some of the press stuff. Whereas actually, you know, she's lovely. She's the best friend you could ever have. So as I say in the book, my partner was Roy Barraclough, who played Alec, her husband. And although I knew Julie somewhat over the years, up until Roy's death, and we met at functions, and Roy and Julie obviously, you know, had some social life together, it really got a much closer bond, because we were both bereaved about the loss of a person. And so that's when it started. So so I've seen that, and she has been a rock for me, really, and I adore her.
I don't want to give too much away from the book, but we've got to talk about some of the things in it. Have you what's kind of a favorite memory that you've got with Julie?
Well, I suppose it's mentioned briefly in the book, when she was made free. I never know what it is because it's free man, but I guess there's a different name now. Free person of Rochdale. She was that, and it was only a few months after Roy died, and she asked if I would be her plus one. So it was a great big ceremony. But Julie is just down to earth. So they were planning this sort of banquet and everything. She wanted fish and chips. And that's what we got. But of course, it was all provided in a banquet form, and it had been with the mayor in all the robes, and you know, and all this. It was a great ceremony. We were done up with tiaras and God knows what. But we sat down to fish and chips. But it had been waiting so long for this ceremony to finish that it was the most revolting fish and chips I've ever been in my life. So we left it, and then we stopped with her in all her glitter and tiaras for fish and chips and the local chippy on the way home. That's Julie.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned it earlier, you called our house Leopard Print Boulevard. I really just got the impression that she must be immensely proud of this character that she helped create in that.
Absolutely, and why wouldn't you be, for goodness sake? I mean, even when I go out and I talk about the history of Coronation Street, Tony, and all that, and I always say, you know, even if you've never watched Coronation Street in your life, I bet if I say to you leopard print, big earrings, and the hair piled up, you will know who I mean. And that's sort of iconic, isn't it? And even in Manchester now, we have posters for travelling on the tram. And although they don't say it's her because they'd have to pay us some money, there is actually a character with a beehive and leopard print and big earrings. You know who it is. And you know, the character is just iconic, and she likes leopard print herself. I think it's in the book, I can't remember now. When I worked at the Oldham Coliseum, where she'd really started her career, there used to be a picture on my office wall of a musical. A funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, and there's Julie as really a stage assistant. She wasn't an actress then, in a leopard print bikini, and she was wearing leopard print long before bed.
So, another Corrie lady that I know you think very fondly of is Jill Summers, who played Blue Rinse Battle Axe Phyllis Pierce in the 80s and 90s. I remember the first time you and I met about 10 years ago, I think. You said that there were so many outrageous stories there were to tell about Jill. Are you happy with the job that you've done portraying this side of her in the book? And are there any favourite stories you mentioned there that you'd like to bring up with listeners now?
Well, I hope so. I mean, Jill was absolutely fantastic. She had a varied career, which I talk about in the book, from the days of Variety, and she appeared at the London Palladium in her own show, you know. And she knew so many people. So she was famous in the world of theatre long before she ever went into Coronation Street. She swore like a trooper. I mean, she was filthy. Absolutely. But she had developed the knack of, she would swear in your ear and only you could hear. And a number of people I have laughed in the face of because she was at my ear saying something about them. So she was dreadful in that regard. And in fact, when she died, there are one or two pictures of her in the book, but when she died, she left me a lot of her memorabilia. So I have her sheet music and a lot of her scripts from her music hall act and all the rest of it. But in amongst it, in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, she appeared a lot at working men's clubs, miners' welfares, and quite rough venues. And she would do 2 shows in a day. In the stuff I've got, lots and lots of letters telling her after the first show that she was too filthy for the miners.
Oh my gosh, that's excellent.
Yeah, and they didn't want her to do the second show, and they'd pay her off. So she was, she was quite a girl. I admired Jill very, very much. She was such a kind, lovely person. Again, to go and see Jill almost every week, and she was full of she had a zest for life. She was full of gossip. When it was near the end, I had a pre-booked Roy and I had a pre-booked holiday, went to America, and she was dying at that point, and she said, we went to see her and say, we have to go away, we'll be away for a week. And when we were away, she rang, or they got her on the phone, and she said, I'm keeping going till you get back. And she did.
Oh, lovely. I did. You mentioned her life story earlier. It was fascinating. Even like acting with live bears on stage, and you got a picture of that in the book as well, haven't you? I loved how you had some of these. It was your memoirs, but it was also part biographical about some of these big names as well. Why did you decide that you wanted to include, the life histories of some of these people, some of these friends in your book?
Well, the usual audience for my talks is certainly over 50. I thought I'd better appeal to a younger audience, and I do a weekly online show, entertainment show, which has a younger audience. And so I thought, well, for the people buying this book, it's no good just saying Hilda Baker or Dorothy Squires or whatever, or Jill. You forget how long it is since these people were on the telly. So I kind of wanted to put in a bit of biography for those readers, so people shouldn't be put off thinking, well, will we know of these people? But also, it's like with Jill, such an amazing backstory, and I was lucky enough to have Jill tell me, and indeed she wrote it down for me, so I have her life story written down. So I wanted to include as much of that as possible, and there was so much sort of interesting stuff in the backstory. As I say in the book, the whole thing is, I love a good story. I love a good yarn. And in fact, I did an awful lot of research to make sure that those yarns were true wherever possible. There's one in the book which I was a bit doubtful of, actually about Dora Bryan. And someone rang me today and said, I bought your book to that point, and I can tell you I was there for that happening. So you are. There we
are. Who, when you were researching for the book, or even just before that, when you were learning about all these people, whose life story would you say you found the most fascinating or surprising to learn about?
I suppose, most of the life stories that I tell, I've already told in some form.
Sure.
The one, I suppose, when Betty Driver died, I didn't know Betty hugely well. Obviously Roy did, but when she died, we went to a funeral, and they played a recording of her singing, and that was the first time I'd heard her, and it was it's beautiful. And I did a bit of research after that. In fact, I've got several of her CDs which are now, and when you discover what her singing career was, and who she worked with, and that she had her own shows, and she replaced Gracie Fields in the biggest show of the time. And you think, actually, often with people, particularly in the street or popular shows, we know them. People die and they get one line, oh, they were in this show. Well, actually, before all of that, there was this whole other life.
I remember when I found out about Betty Driver's career, I couldn't believe it, because when I picture her, I think of Betty on Coronation Street, and kind of the tough old bird barmaid, grumpy barmaid. But she had this massive career, and with the singing, she was so glamorous, wasn't she?
Absolutely, and the story of her sister, and it's a bit like the musical Gypsy, really, their life story. So that was kind of fascinating to learn. And then knowing Betty a bit, people always used to say and write in and say, it's about time they gave Betty a storyline. She hated having storylines. She didn't like storylines at all. She just wanted to do her little bit. I always remember. Do you remember they married her off to Billy Williams?
Yeah.
played by Frank, lovely Frank Mills, and they decided that that character they were going to write out. They didn't use him very much, and in fact they called Frank in and they said, we're not going to kill you off, we're just never going to see you again, so we're going to give the character a very distinctive car that will be parked on the street every now and again so the viewers don't realize he's gone. And Frank said, replacing me with a car. So they killed him off, and Betty went sick. So in actual fact, the scenes where Alec had sacked Betty yet again, and then the idea was her husband would die and that would cause Alec to have to take her back. But actually Betty didn't film any of those scenes. She went sick. I don't think she was really sick, you see, she just didn't like her story. So in actual fact, it had to be shot with Alec going round to the house, Betty not answering the door, and him having to say through the letterbox something like, I'm sorry, your husband's died.
Great story. Speaking of Betty, I thought it was funny when you were talking about Jill and Betty and the fact that Bill Waddington supposedly proposed to both of them, who of course played Percy Sugden.
Well, Bill was a colourful character, and
Was he?
yes, he was. I liked Bill, but he was quite full of himself, and he was very pleased with his success and everything. And he was always looking to make an extra dime. You know, I think I say in the book, he used to sometimes pull up with the car outside the queue to the old Granada Studios tours and sell flat caps out of the boot of the car. And all this kind of stuff. He was into everything, Bill. I hosted a couple of things with him. But yes, Jill never sort of forgave him for the fact that he had proposed to her. And then, of course, she tells this story at Granada, and Betty's there. And Betty said, well, he proposed to me as well. Well, that was the end for Jill. But actually, Bill was married quite a few times. So I think he was a bit like Fred Elliott, I suppose.
I was going to say Fred Elliott, serial proposer.
I think he was an old romantic, Bill, yes.
Yeah. Now, of course, the cast member who's a constant throughout your book is Roy Barraclough, Alec Gilroy, who you had this wonderful relationship with for over 25 years. Tell me about the importance of Roy in your life.
Well, Roy changed my life completely. So I had been I trained as an actor, and I'd done voiceover work and things like that. And I was doing pantomime or just done pantomime when we met. And he left Coronation Street the first time when Alec went writing. And so he was doing a musical of Sherlock Holmes. And that's when we met. And I tell the story in the book of how we met. And so, yes, we were together for just over 25 years when he died in 2017. Roy was very, very shy, kept well out of the limelight, felt that actors needed to observe the public in order to kind of play parts and pick up. And so he didn't like being recognized in that regard. I mean, he was lovely with people if they did recognize him, but but he didn't like all that. And he didn't like the sort of celebrity thing. So he did very few interviews and things in his lifetime. I remember the only time we went to the British Soap Awards, hated all that. Barbara Knox got Lifetime Achievement, and they asked Roy to present it, and he said yes.
I remember.
Yes. In fact, I have somewhere in this house the British Soap Award that he got for presenting one to Barbara. And so so we stayed backstage for the whole of the soap awards because there's no way he'd sit in the audience. So no, he didn't like all that. He didn't like the show busy bit at all. He didn't like people making a fuss at all. So that was sometimes difficult to deal with. As he was much happier wandering around Morrison's, and he would chat to people about the show and things like that. But doing anything stage or whatever wasn't for him. Right. But he was also a great Mickey taker. And most of the cast, I would say, of that era, in fact, I was talking to Simon Gregson about this the other day, Roy would puncture the tension on the set. I mean, today, as you know, they don't really rehearse or anything, but in those days, they would rehearse and do camera runs and all the rest of it. And it could get quite tense at times. Roy would send the whole thing up. But he would also do something, it was a bit bit of devilment. I remember him going in one day, and there was no parking space at the studio. This was on Key Street. No parking space to be had. So he came home, and before he got home, the phone was ringing. He answered the phone. Where is he? Where is he? He's got 14, there was a party in the Rovers or whatever. There were hundreds of people there. And where is he? And anyway, he arrived home, and I said they'd been on the phone. Well, there was no park. So the phone's ringing, and the mobile's going, and the landline's going, and my mobile's going. They need him to go there. Everyone's waiting for him. So he had lunch and waited and waited and waited. But he always got a parking space after that.
I bet. Well, I enjoyed reading about some of the pranks that he got up to on set as well. Some of the mischievous ways that he used to pass the time when he was bored between or even during takes. Actually, what are some of your favourite examples of that kind of thing?
If you look carefully, if you watch some of these scenes, look carefully, you will see them here and there. So he and Bill Tarney were very good friends, and they used to muck about a lot in the back of shots. So their favourite things were, there used to be a sooty, like, charity collecting tin on the Rovers bar, and so I would stand as Alec in the back of shot with a knife up Sooty's bum, trying to get coins out. But that ran for years, that one, and then Bill would take off Jack Duckworth's watch and bang it on the bar as if it wasn't working, and then they would stand there and take the watch apart. And you got to the end, they'd done that so many times that there was hardly any watch left, because they'd take this blinking thing apart and put it back together. But yeah, so he would do things like that. Lynn Perry, who played Ivy Tilsley, she was often the butt of lots of things as well, because she always lived slightly on the edge, did Lynn. So he would often take the mickey, because if you told her to do something, she'd do it. So if you said walk into this shot, she would do it, and she'd ruin a shot and get told off and all this kind of stuff. She was very good, very fair game for things like that. And I remember once we were like a Curry's or something, and Lynn was there looking at some appliance, and so Roy paid the security guard to go and arrest her. So all those kind of things he liked to do.
Do you know if he has any favourite scenes to film, any like really memorable moments?
He liked the wall collapse. Do you remember between Rita and Alec's flat?
Yes.
He liked doing that one, and he liked that story, because again, known Barbara, since 1966, when they're both in the Oldham Theatre together. So they love doing stuff together. So he liked that. And then in the Rovers, the other one was he loved the telephone, and a lot of people comment on the one-way telephone calls about variety acts and Murphy's Chicken, one that used to come up a lot. He loved doing those calls. And then the other one, which he hated, because he was terrified of spiders, Roy.
I was going to ask about this one. Yeah, the tarantula thing.
Funnily enough, I did a stage show, one-man stage show on Friday night, which was a premiere thing I did, which was a tribute to Roy and Les Dawson. And I clip in, and of course they used a real spider, and they had to have his hand touch the spider. Well, I mean, how he did it, I don't know, because he couldn't lift up a little spider in the house. But that terrified him. But of course, that was the one that was often played in shows about Alec. Yes, and he loved working with Chloe, who played Vicky, his granddaughter, and they were and I. We would go all over the country if Chloe was doing a theatre show. In fact, they did a couple together. But if she was doing, we always went. He always turned up. He always sent her flowers. And she's always been sort of almost like real granddaughter, really.
Yeah, and you could tell that on screen between the two of them. I really did get a sense of the close relationship between Alec and poor orphan Vicky.
Yes, although a little story about that. The first Vicky was a different actress.
Yes, for a bit, wasn't she? Yeah.
I want to say Emma, but I don't think it's somebody Warburton. Anyway, so, and then Vicky went, and then of course they brought her back, and the first scene they had with Chloe was them Bet and Alec going to the railway station to meet her off the train coming back from school.
Mm.
So she'd been put on the train at the previous station at Stockport, so she could actually get off the train, and they were there. So she's terrified because she's working with these big stars and it's her first day filming. And of course, they rush up to the thing, she gets off, and they just shout, "And who are you?"
So moving away from Corrie slightly, I was really, really chuffed to hear earlier this year, Mark, how you were appointed Deputy Lieutenant of Greater Manchester. What does it mean to you to hold this position? And if you'll pardon my ignorance, what does the role actually entail?
I'll correct your pronunciation, so it's Deputy Lieutenant.
Lieutenant, I do apologise.
Every county in Britain has a lieutenancy. Lord Lieutenant is appointed by the King now, along with the High Sheriff, and then the Lord Lieutenant appoints a team of deputies. So there are several of us. In fact, Shobna Gulati is a deputy of Greater Manchester with me.
Oh, really?
And so they're people that have kind of done stuff in their local community. So you're asked to do it. You do it until you're 75 or until you're dead. I'll try and go for the 75. And it's a voluntary post. In fact, the lieutenancy doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. You'll be very pleased to know. We pay for it ourselves. And you do things like you do citizenship ceremonies, visit charities and community groups to help them be nominated for the King's Award, as it is now, for voluntary service, or businesses for business awards. You can nominate people, and you kind of publicize the honour system that anyone can nominate anyone except themselves. So you do that. You attend community events. We organise visits by the royal family to the area that we represent. And we work with community groups, and basically we attend. If the Lord Lieutenant can't attend something, we go in her, as it is in my case, her stead. So it means going out and basically meeting. It's great because you meet people who are doing great things, and we often forget, don't we? Because you switch on the news and there's never anything nice in the news, really. And so you're out and about in the community, meeting great people doing great things.
Oh, that sounds perfect for you. Knowing you, that's right up your street. It's great to hear how busy you keep it with it as well.
Absolutely, no, I'm enjoying it very much.
Back to Corrie then. Tony Warren. So Coronation Street's creator. He's one of the biggest names to mention when you're talking about Coronation Street. As someone who got to know him on a personal level, how would you describe what he was like?
So he was like Roy. He was he was quite quiet at times, so much so that you used to sometimes think, oh, he's not very pleased, but he was all right. Once you got him going, however, then it opened the floodgates and out came the performer. And of course, full of wonderful, wonderful stories. And he'd known, so obviously Roy knew him through Coronation Street, but he also wrote another TV series called The War of Darky Pilbeam, which starred Roy and Trevor Bannister, who would go on to do Are You Being Served? Julie made an appearance as well. And that was about a black marketeer in Manchester. So Roy had known him for many, many years. But yes, Tony, as I say in the book, Tony, we would meet sometimes when I was asked to be the Corrie expert on documentaries and things. And he was there, and he would say, I'm fed up. I don't want to talk about the show. But you kind of understand, after he told all the stories. But of course, for me, and I think for lots of people, to kind of meet the person who was there for the casting of Elsie Tanner and Doris. I mean, I did meet Doris briefly once, Doris Speed, but his part in putting the show together, but then in working with those fabulous people was brilliant. And so to get him talking about them, I mean, I can't repeat a lot of what he said, it was slanderous, but he was a great teller of tales.
Yeah, you said that you were really chuffed to meet him because of the role he played in putting Coronation Street together. You've known so many big Coronation Street names and other names from stage and screen over the years. Was there anyone that you were ever like properly starstruck by?
I mentioned in the book Joan Littlewood, who ran Stratford East and was responsible for Oh What a Lovely War and all those people. And I met her at a Barbara Windsor thing. Slightly tongue-tied to meet her because she was one of the people I studied at drama school.
Oh, yeah.
So that was lovely to meet her. And when I left drama school, the first place I ever worked was actually in a drama school. And the patron was Sir John Mills.
Mm-hmm.
And he just turned up one day. I went in and unlocked. I was the first person there. I was unlocking the office and sat in a corridor with Sir John Mills. And not expecting him, you sort of do a double take and think, you know, who's that old man? Oh, it's John. And so he came in the office, had a alcoholic beverage at about 8:30 in the morning, and just told me all about his career. And I'll never forget. I never met him again. But that was. I was a bit starstruck meeting John Mills in a corridor.
Oh. So something that struck me reading the book is just how many of these cast members and other famous people over the year, you've not just meeting them, you've organised events with them, you've interviewed them, you've introduced them at special events, and even had some of them show up on tours that you've arranged for fans as well. Tell me a bit about the tours side of things that you've been involved in over the years.
So I still do the big tour for, well, two actually a year for Canadian fans.
Mm-hmm.
In September normally, and I've done those on and off. I've had the odd break here and there for about 25 years. I know. I mean, they're lovely. The Canadian fans are absolutely fantastic. I have done other stuff. I must mention Finnish fans and Irish fans and Australian fans and New Zealanders. I've done stuff with all of those people. But I have the Canadian fans over for normally a week to 10 days each September. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest tour. So sitting just over here on my desk is the itinerary for this year's tour. Right. I do all the itinerary, work out where we're going to go, and also who we're going to meet. And in terms of meeting people, they get to go to the studios for a start, and to look around all the sets and that kind of thing, which is lovely. Mm-hmm. And it always, because you can get a bit blasé once you've been to the studio. You know, I've been to the studios a lot. Yeah. But seeing it through their eyes is a good shot in the arms, good tonic to realise how much the show means to people.
Yeah, what are some of the most memorable reactions that you've seen from fans getting to visit the cobbles or meet one of their on-screen heroes?
Well, I mean, in terms of fans, I've had a proposal on Maxine's bench. During one, I've had them throwing themselves on the floor where Tina McIntyre died, of course. Yeah. I staged a Corrie wedding, but not at the studios, at the registry of it. Mm-hmm. And then one year, I think it was the 50th anniversary, they all fell to their knees and kissed the cobbles. Yeah. So, but of course, I always say to them, you know, you might turn a corner and there's somebody off the show, and you've got to remember it's an actor. If you hate the character, please don't attack them. Just remember what a brilliant actor they must be, that you feel like that about their character. And as you'll know, you know, a lot of people who play the villains are some of the nicest people you could possibly. Todd and, you know, people are the nicest people on the show. So sometimes I'm a bit wary about the reactions. Last year we had, because at the dinners that we do, we have usually a cast member. Sometimes it's somebody on the production team, but usually a cast member. And they make a surprise appearance, so I know who's going to be coming. Sometimes I'll drop a clue during the day. And last year, I often say, "Who to meet?" And this lady said, "I am in love with Mikey North," and he was the guest that night. And so I met Mikey in the hotel reception. I said, "Look, this woman is in love with you." So he made a big fuss, which was absolutely fantastic. So when you're able to do that and make someone's dream come true in that way, you know, that's great. I love it.
Yeah. Mikey North is so lovely, isn't he? He's the nicest guy.
Oh, he's actually one of my favourites, I think. Yes.
So what was it when you started running the tours and doing the research for places that you could take Corrie fans on the trips of Manchester to? Was it then that you started to really increase your knowledge about the history of Coronation Street, or was it something you've always been a bit of a buff about?
No, I hadn't at all. I mean, I'd watched it, and obviously, and Roy was in it at that time.
Hmm.
So I used to, I the scripts. I played all the parts for him, so I knew what was happening. I knew what was coming. um, but no, what happened was the tours were happening, and I got a call. I think from it might have been from Darren Little. I can't remember. To say they wanted to bring the fans to the Coliseum Theatre.
Mm.
I do a tour of the theatre, which I did. And then the following year, I got a call to say that the guide who normally did it wasn't well. And was there any chance that I would do the whole 10 days?
Wow.
And I said yes. And then I had to sit down and try and learn as much as I possibly could. So I winged it a little bit. But over the years, and there was no internet, you didn't have anything on your phone in those days. You couldn't look anything up. But over the years, that knowledge has increased because of doing more and more stuff, of course. Yeah.
What have been some of your favourite stories and characters in Coronation Street over the years?
Really difficult, that question,
I
because
know.
I can't disassociate the actor from the character, and I tend to think of them as the actor first. So I would have to go with the people I knew the best, I suppose, the people I like the best. So that's a difficult one. I mean, in terms of stories, I think I say in the book, the first thing I remember is the lorry crashing in the front of the Rovers. Obviously, the things you most remember are the big stunts, aren't they? Richard Hillman and Gale, appropriate this week, I suppose, going into the canal, which I think you and I have been to the canal,
Have
which is not far down the road from me. In fact, we had with the other hat on, Princess Anne visited at that spot only a few weeks ago. So it's those sort of ones, I suppose. I mean, for Bet and Alec, although it was a slightly odd story, when Bet got pregnant and lost their child,
Yeah.
thought both of them were kind of slightly horrified at that story, but they did it beautifully.
They did.
And I think, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's spin-offs. But I certainly like the stuff with Rita and Alec and the wall and all that. And that would have led, I think, to Rita and Alec marrying.
Yeah.
That was the plan.
It's the plan until he had decided not to stay.
Yes. Well, he'd already kind of decided he wasn't staying, but they'd forgotten to ask him whether that was what actually happened. They'd forgotten to ask him whether he was renewing his contract in September, and they'd already gone ahead with the storyline. So when they sort of said, right, now we're doing this, he said, well, I'm not signing. I've decided to go. And it caught them by surprise. And that's why Alec left very hurriedly, handing the keys to Natalie. And it was all in a big hurry because they'd forgotten to sign him.
I did love that relationship, and I remember I think it was not long after Roy died that there was a scene in Rita's flat, and that we saw a picture of Alec on the sideboard.
They've been very kind, I have to say. Alec's picture is Bet and Alec are on the board just inside the door of the Rovers as well. Yeah. Yes, and I'm often allowed to do. The other week, my mum wanted to visit the studios. Now she's watched it all her life. She came to Key Street. She obviously knew Roy, knew he was a real person. They had a fantastic relationship. She wanted to come and go. So they arranged for my mum to go around the studios recently and watch them filming and all the rest of it. And my mum walked into the shell of the terraces and said, what happened to the people that used to live here before you started filming? It's made up. But she couldn't believe it. So they then took her in the florist shop, and if you go through a door, you're in the court, and then you go into, as you know, and then into the hospital, and then she kind of said, oh, I see what you mean. Then we went to the precinct, and she said, where are all the people?
Well, I hope you haven't spoilt it for her and ruined the illusion.
No.
I know from visiting your house once over a few years ago, that you got quite a collection of Corrie treasures and trinkets from over the years, haven't you, Mark? What are some of your favourite items that you've picked up over the years?
Got a few things here for you. So, and a couple of these are mentioned in the book. So, this is this is actually for Panto. Roy used to wear this. You can see it, there we are. In Panto. So this is a quick change when you're going from poor Dane to rich. You see, it just fits there, and then you can take it on and off. But actually, this necklace was worn by Lynn Carroll, who played Martha Longhurst.
Oh,
And
wow.
she used to wear it in shows a lot, and she gifted it to him. So he always wore it as a tribute to Martha Longhurst and Lynn Carroll in pantomime. So I brought that for you. Then we've got there's a let's hold that up. There's a let me go like that. How's that?
Brilliant.
That's one of Bet's brooches, which Julie gifted me along with a load of other stuff. So that was one of her favourites there. I've got quite a lot of Bet's jewellery. The famous
Oh, the Tracy statue.
Tracy killing Charlie statue. Now I have to say one of, because they did have quite a few. This one was used, and then it went on tour with the Jonathan Harvey Corrie show, the country for the 50th, and this was what they used in that as well. So I've got that. That's one of those. The bell pull from the Rovers.
Very nice.
Yes, which was there for many, many years for calling time. I have got in this little Corrie tin, I have a pair of Pat Phoenix's earrings, which again, let's try and there we go.
Yeah,
They're not real diamond. And Roy would wear those in Panama as well. I have got that's Jill Summers, some of Jill Summers' sheet music there, from her act that she would take with her. That is again mentioned in the book. This is the 1967 dossier, which was how they were going to modernize the show. And there's all the storylines in here. They get a bit complicated because there's a whole storyline for two characters that are dead. And then they crossed it out and put these are dead.
I'd like to read that one day, Mark.
And there's all the plans for how they're going to develop the set and all the rest of it. That was put together by Richard Everett, producer. There's Roy's name of his dressing room. And here.
Wow. Is that a Hilda duck?
Yes. So I have a set of 3, which were given to me by Bill Podmore, the legendary producer of The Street. There were several sets. Now I have the full set. They were losing their paint then, and they're losing even more paint today. And they couldn't use them for that reason. Now I cannot, I can't 100% say that was on the set or whether it was on the mock set at the studio tours or whatever. But it certainly came from the series. And so as far as I know, because they don't have a set at the exhibition, and I asked why, and they said because they've all been lost over the years or broken. So that may be the last set that I actually own. I don't know.
That is pretty special. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those. That's been brilliant. Mark, it's been lovely speaking to you today. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and hearing about all your stories. I've, as I said before, I absolutely loved that book. So thank you very much for sending a copy. And with friends like these, it's brilliant. Do you want to give one final plug for it before we finish off for today?
So it's out on Amazon. It's paperback. It's also an ebook for Kindle. And on Monday, I go into the studio to start recording the audio.
Oh, really?
Yes, book. How many hours is that going to take? I've got 2 4-hour sessions in next week. So I'm voicing my own book. And so it'll then be out on Audible probably next month, I would imagine. So, and the profits from that are all going to charity, and a lot of the book signings I'm doing are all for charity. That was one of the reasons I did it as well.
Lovely. Well, I can heartily recommend it to any Coronation Street fan, especially if you liked, the 80s, 90s kind of golden era. There's so many brilliant stories there. I loved it. Mark, it's been wonderful speaking to you today. Lovely to catch up with you again. Thank you for coming onto the podcast.
You.
I will hopefully see you again sometime soon.
So, and thanks for your support.
No worries. Right, bye-bye then.
Bye.